Aren't you flinching?
What is there to say about Inglourious Basterds that hasn't already been said? I mean, just researching this essay makes clear that this movie has already been very thoroughly analysed by Film YouTube. But something I noticed is that almost all of these videos focus on two things: breaking down the opening scene of the farmhouse, or looking at Christoph Waltz's Hans Landa. And I mean, you can see why. The opening scene is an impeccable example of suspense and dramatic tension in writing and filmmaking. You've probably already seen it, but Lessons from the Screenplay's breakdown of this scene is one of the best things on YouTube. And the focus on Hans Landa is also understandable. How can a character who is so ruthless and evil be so compelling? So in this video, I'm going to do something that not many others have done. I'm going to look at this movie in its entirety, because while the opening scene and Landa are absolutely some of the best bits of it, I think that focusing on them can sometimes overshadow how great the rest of the movie is. So, like Inglourious Basterds itself, this video is presented in 5 chapters that will each look into a different part of the movie. How Tarantino wrote the film in the first place, Aldo, the Bastards and the Jewish revenge angle. We'll look at Shoshana and Hans Landa, and of course, the Tavern Scene, in my opinion an even better example of tension and suspense than the opening. Finally, or you might say the cream you're waiting for, we'll look at the climax where all of the storylines come together in quite literally an explosive way. By the end of the video, it will be clear why I think this film is Tarantino's masterpiece, and over a decade later remains one of the best films of the 21st century. So let's start at the very beginning with Once Upon a Time. Tarantino began the script for Inglourious Basterds almost 10 years before it was finished. He actually began writing it in 1998, shortly after wrapping his third film, Jackie Brown.
I came up with most of the characters that you see in the movie now, and I came up with the idea of the character Aldo Rain, played by Brad Pitt, who leads these Jewish-American soldiers behind enemy lines. So I had that in my head, Shoshana in mind, the character that Melanie Laurent plays.
Right. By this stage, Tarantino was already a huge name after following up his debut Reservoir Dogs with the even more iconic Pulp Fiction, probably his most influential movie, and in my opinion, the only other Tarantino film that has a shot at the masterpiece title. So if he had wanted to make it then, he could have, but the story was just too big to be a movie, and he felt it was more appropriate as a novel or a miniseries. He also struggled to get the ending right, so he shelved it until picking up the pen again in 2008. What changed?
Oh mein Gott! Sind Sie es?
Möglich?
Once the Frederick Zoller character was developed, the rest of the story fell into place by bringing the Nazi high command together in the cinema and having the characters all converge on that point. Tarantino said that the first 2 chapters in the movie are made up of older material. Everything from chapter 3 to the end I wrote in one big go. So after almost 10 years on ice, the entire movie suddenly came together in almost record time. Tarantino finished the script in just 7 months in July 2008, and just 13 weeks later they began filming, with the goal of premiering at the Cannes Film Festival in May 2009. Now, everyone knows that Tarantino is obsessed with movies, and has an encyclopedic knowledge of cinema history that directly and indirectly influences his work. After all, the title of the movie comes from a 1978 film by Enzo Castellari, although the plots have little in common. Also, I'm going to put this here because apparently people keep asking this question.
Why is Bastards spelled like that?
Oh, you know what? Here's the thing. I'm never going to explain that. You know, when you do an artistic flourish like that, to describe it, to explain it, is just take the piss out of it and invalidate the whole stroke in the first place.
One of the main inspirations for Tarantino when making Bastards was Sergio Leone's own masterpiece, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, which Tarantino himself has said is his favourite movie of all time. Nowhere is the connection clearer than in the opening scene, which is a direct mirror to the scene that introduces Angel Eyes in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Of course, the music is a clear nod to Ennio Morricone's score for that film. Papa! More than that, both scenes open with a peaceful, rural setting. They show a calm family going about their chores when a sinister figure appears on the horizon, causing the family distress. We, the audience, don't know why, but it is clear that this is someone to be afraid of. The stranger enters the home and confronts the father, alone. A suspenseful conversation ensues at the table, slowly revealing more information about the characters and the growing threat, before finishing in an explosive shootout. This is how Tarantino pays homage to films, and shows how he has become more refined as a filmmaker from when he did more direct tributes in, say, Reservoir Dogs. The use of close-ups to emphasize key character moments and expressions, and the use of silence to create tension are both lifted straight from Sergio Leone's playbook, and Tarantino uses them brilliantly here, as he does in the bar scene, which we'll look at in Chapter 4. But the opening scene also shows us another way in which Tarantino has grown as a filmmaker since Dogs and Pulp Fiction, and is one of the reasons I consider Bastards to be the better film. See, Tarantino is a master of dialogue, and what he does with the opening scene of Bastards is take his talent for writing compelling dialogue and uses it to create suspense.
I remember after I came out with Pulp Fiction, some critic said something to the effect of, Tarantino will never be a master of suspense because he's too far in love with minutia. And I actually thought that was a fair enough criticism back then. Now I want to actually do a movie where I actually indulge in suspense, and I go for it.
Because of how we have seen the family react to Landa's arrival, we know that he is a threat, and we're compelled to know why. This isn't just some characters having some casual banter about burgers or whether or not to tip your waitress, but there are real, genuine stakes here, and we're desperate to know what happens next. Now, there are, of course, scenes in Tarantino's other movies where the dialogue is used to create tension or drama, but in Bastards, he takes it to the next level, and nowhere is this clearer than in the opening scene. Now, I promise we'll talk about Hans Landa more in Chapter 3, but first, let's talk about... Before we get into this chapter, I want to take a second to talk about this, the scar on Rain's neck, which is never explained in the movie. I want to talk about this because this is the sort of thing Tarantino does. He puts in little unexplained details into his movies, and he leaves you to make up your own mind about what they mean.
I like the idea that if you contemplate why there is a rope burn there, and somebody else contemplates why there is a rope burn there, and somebody else contemplates it, and three different people come up with three different reasons why he got a rope burn, those are three different movies you all saw. I like the idea that you open up the briefcase in Pulp Fiction, and I don't tell you what's in there, but it's up to you to figure out what's in there, and now that's your movie.
I think this is a great attitude when it comes to the enjoyment of art and films in general. Not everything needs to be explained, and a good storyteller will leave some gaps for you to fill in for yourself and to debate with your friends. How did Aldo get his scar? What's in the briefcase in Pulp Fiction? Ultimately, it doesn't matter, but isn't it so much more fun not knowing?
Midichlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells.
One of the reasons I think Tarantino's films are so popular is because they're so good at generating this kind of debate. Whether it is something small like how Aldo got his scar, or something larger like the overarching theme and message of the story, Tarantino encourages you to find your own meaning in his work. So let's get back to the Bastards and look at one of the more prominent interpretations of the movie, which is that of it being a story of Jewish revenge. Now, I'm not Jewish, so I don't think it's appropriate for me to weigh in on this debate, but if you're going to make a half-hour-long video essay on a movie that's about
8 Jewish American soldiers,
then I think it's worth taking a moment to discuss this angle, so I'll present both sides as neutrally as I can and, like Tarantino, encourage you to arrive at your own conclusion. If you are interested in a way more in-depth Jewish perspective on the Holocaust and World War II in fiction, then I can absolutely recommend Lady Night the Brave's brilliant essay on Jojo Rabbit. Anyway, when Bastards came out in 2009, it generated some debate within Jewish communities. In an Atlantic article, editor Jeffrey Goldberg recounts a conversation he had with Tarantino, where the director had diagnosed what he saw as an essential, maddening flaw of every Holocaust movie ever made. Holocaust movies always have Jews as victims. I wanted to see something different. Let's see Germans that are scared of Jews. Let's not have everything build up to a big misery. Goldberg's full article is worth a read because he actually has quite a nuanced take, acknowledging that he himself used to have fantasies of violent revenge against the Nazis. He was also more nuanced than some of the Jews involved in the film itself, like producer Lawrence Bender or star Eli Roth, who plays the Bear Jew.
For me, it's like kosher porn. It's something it's something I have fantasized about since I was a very young child.
The audience reaction to Roth's comment here is not entirely unusual. The New York Times reported on a screening of the film at the Jewish Theological Seminary. Some people, the article says, walked out early, but the majority stayed and cheered at the end. Probably the more prominent response to this positive reception of the Jewish revenge story came from Daniel Mendelsohn, criticized what he saw as excessive violence and even torture of Nazis by the Jewish characters. He criticized the film for what he saw as turning Jews into Nazis, comparing the final scene to gas chambers, but instead it was Jews burning Nazis alive. In a later interview, he refined his comments by saying, "I'm all for badass Jews, but I don't think the way to be badass is to smash Nazis in the head with baseball bats. The ethical point I was trying to make in that piece is that the appropriate way for Jews to fight back against real Nazis or neo-Nazis is not to imitate appreciate their tactics. As for Tarantino himself, well, in his interview with Goldberg, he wasn't too worried about the criticism, saying, "Why would they condemn me? I was too brutal to the Nazis?" But he has also said that he wanted the film to have at least some measure of moral questionability. I mean, take this scene.
Did that for killing Jews? Bravery.
Not only is there another clear Sergio Leone nod with the music, but Tarantino wrote and directed this scene in this specific way to make you feel some degree of admiration for the sergeant.
That German sergeant, under any criteria of bravery in the face of enemy, passes the test. And you can't help but even kind of admire the German sergeant.
At Cannes, Tarantino didn't totally discredit the Jewish revenge interpretation of the film, but didn't rule it out.
And I'm wondering if this is a Jewish revenge fantasy.
That wouldn't be exactly how I would define it. Yeah, you can definitely say that, and it works completely as that way. That wouldn't be the section of the video store maybe I would put it in.
After all, the film literally says,
"My name is Shoshana Dreyfus, and this is the face of Jewish vengeance."
So yes, Inglourious Basterds is a story of Jewish revenge. That's not the only story, and it's not the only interpretation of the film, but it is one of them. Whether or not you think that's a good thing is personal to you. Anyway, that's enough theology, I think. Let's get back to some good old-fashioned film analysis and talk about everyone's favorite Nazi. Chapter 3 of Inglourious Basterds focuses on Shoshana Dreyfus, the sole survivor after Landa killed her family in the opening scene. She's living in Paris, operating a cinema under the cover name of Emmanuel Mimieux. Now, Shoshana was originally supposed to be a much more Kill Bill style character.
I had her much more of like being a real badass. And she was killing Nazis, and she had a list of officers. She was like a real Joan of Arc of the Jews. And I put it away, and I did Kill Bill. And almost everything that I liked about Shoshana, I gave to the bride. So when I come back to it after Kill Bill, I go, well, I can't do this again. But what I liked about that aspect was it actually enabled me to make Shoshana more realistic. As opposed to being this tough Joan of Arc girl, she's a survivor.
Despite her best efforts, she is relentlessly pursued by Friedrich Zoller, a Nazi war hero played to perfection by Daniel Brühl. Now, Zoller and Shoshana's dialogue is a joy to watch. Both actors just bounce off each other so brilliantly, and I just love the way in which Melanie Laurent's face constantly shows us exactly what Shoshana is thinking. Of course, Tarantino can't resist dropping in some movie banter as well.
J'ai toujours préféré Landa à Chaplin. Si ce n'est que Landa n'a jamais fait un film aussi bon que Le Kid.
But for me, the best moment in this chapter is her reunion with Hans Landa. This is the first time either she or the audience have seen him since the opening scene, where he seemed to delight in letting her escape. I love the scene with Landa and Shoshana because he is really doing the same thing, reveling in the fact that he has all the power. He's displaying the same charm, politeness, and good humor that he did when talking to Monsieur Lapidite, but this time, Shoshana knows it is all a facade as soon as he says this.
Pour moi, un café serré. Et pour la demoiselle, un verre de lait.
But she still has to sit there and eat a dessert with him, pretending everything is fine when she knows that he knows who she really is. And Landa is loving it. For him, it is all about the power.
We know as an audience that he knows something. Yeah. We know that she fears something. We know that he is the powerful one, and she might end up being a victim. She's not a victim yet. Are we about to witness, exercise of power? Well, we expect it, given the uniform.
Landa lights a cigarette, and Tarantino gives us a close-up of his face, suddenly sinister and calculating. Of course, we've seen this once before. When Landa lights up his pipe in the opening scene, it immediately precedes this moment.
You're sheltering enemies of the state, are you not?
A quick side note here, Tarantino and Waltz have both said that Landa doesn't smoke a pipe.
But I started thinking about it more and more as pre-production was going on, and I had dinner with Christoph, and I asked him, I go, what if Landa doesn't smoke a pipe? He knows the farmer smokes a pipe. And so at a certain point, he brings out this pipe. And what pipe does he bring out? He brings out the Sherlock Holmes pipe. So maybe he doesn't smoke a pipe at all. It's simply just an interrogation technique to throw the farmer, send him more to hell. And every scene he does is some version of an interrogation. And every piece of interrogation is a piece of theater
It's not the only time Landa uses deception like this. Remember in the opening scene how he says this?
Did they call you the Jew hunter?
Precisely. Now, I, on the other hand, love my unofficial title, precisely because I've earned it.
But at the end, when negotiating with Rain, he says this.
But Jew hunter? Just a name that stuck.
Well, I think he's doing the same thing with Shoshana. Notice how he offers her a cigarette, then lights his own, and for a moment you can see him pondering whether or not to reveal what he knows, exactly as he did in the opening scene. But he decides against it, and stubs it out without taking a drag. We never see Landa smoke in any of his other scenes. He's just using the pipe or the cigarette as yet another prop in his perfectly calculated plans. Of course, there's another parallel with Shoshana, Landa, and the opening scene at the end of the movie. After Landa kills Shoshana's family in the opening scene, we get this bird's eye view of him at a time when he holds all the power. In the final chapter, we see the exact same shot, only this time it is Shoshana in control, about to bring down the Third Reich.
What is that English expression about shoes and feet?
Looks like the shoe's on the other foot.
Getting the right actor to play Hans Landa was, in Tarantino's view, the most important thing for the film.
Quentin was feeling a little kind of, I could see he was off, and said, you know, I might have written a role that can't be cast. And if I can't find this person, I don't think we should make the movie.
Tarantino has always had an exceptional eye for casting, and he absolutely struck gold with Waltz as Hans Landa. But Inglourious Basterds was also a breakout role for another one of my favourite actors. That's right, we're going to talk about Michael Fassbender and the Tavern Scene. I'm surprised that this scene hasn't received the same level of analysis as the opening because to me, it is another outstanding example of how to build tension and suspense. Tarantino has described this as being like a rubber band.
As long as that rubber band can stretch, the longer the scene can hold, the more suspenseful it is. That scene is more suspenseful at 22 minutes than would be at 8.
In this scene, we are introduced to Diane Kruger's character Bridget von Hammersmark, a German film star working as a spy for the Allies. She rendezvous with Fassbender's character, a film critic turned soldier, and the two German-speaking members of the Bastards. Where do they meet?
You didn't say the goddamn rendezvous in a fucking basement.
In this scene, the party is soon confronted by Major Hellstrom, a Gestapo officer who is suspicious of Fassbender's German accent, which he explains by citing the 1929 film The White Hell of Peace Palou.
Haben Sie den Riefenstahl-Film gesehen?
Ja.
Dann haben Sie mich gesehen. Erinnern Sie sich an die Schießszene? In dieser Szene spielen ich, mein Vater, meine Schwester und meine 2 Brüder. Bruder sieht so gut aus, dass der Regisseur Papst eine Großaufnahme von ihm gedreht hat.
Again, this is Tarantino building on his earlier work. In his other movies, his characters just banter about movies. Here, their knowledge of movie trivia is the difference between life and death. Like in the opening scene, Tarantino uses the contrast of dialogue and silence to generate tension. He's not afraid to give the audience time to just feel the threat, and all the while the rubber band keeps stretching and stretching until, just as we think they've gotten away with it,
3 Gläser.
even if we don't know how, we know immediately from Hellstrom that their cover is blown, but we don't deal with this right away. What follows instead is almost a full minute with no dialogue, just silence, the diegetic sounds of the scene, and the expressions of the actors. We know something is coming, but Tarantino is going to keep stretching the rubber band until... But even then, we're not done. The Mexican standoff continues for over 2.5 minutes, in which time we get one of the best lines of the movie.
Well, if this is it, old boy, I hope you don't mind if I go out speaking to kings.
Finally, 20 minutes into the scene, the rubber band snaps.
Stiglitz.
Say auf Wiedersehen to your Nazi boss.
The final chapter sees all of the plot threads come together and gives us some of the best bits in the entire movie. Of course, we have the most memeable moment in the Tarantino film.
Ooh, that's a bingo!
We also have possibly the single funniest line in Brad Pitt's career.
Buongiorno.
In fact, the whole sequence in Italian is just hilarious.
Margarete.
Un'altra volta, ma adesso vorrei proprio sentire la musica delle parole.
Originally, the intention was for the American characters to speak Italian a little bit better than this, but when Pitt said his lines in character during the read-through, that was it. There's other things to love in this chapter too. I've talked about this shot before, but it's not the only parallel to an earlier scene we have in this chapter. When Landa is interrogating von Hammersmark, Tarantino pulls in on the characters in a close-up Dutch angle. The only other time we've seen a Dutch angle in this film was this scene, right before the execution of the sergeant at the hands of the bear Jew. This whole chapter really is Christoph Waltz's moment of glory. He dominates every scene he is in, and you can just tell he is having an absolute blast with every moment. The climax of the movie sees Shoshana and Marcel lock the Nazis inside the cinema and burn it down, while the bastards shoot Hitler in the face and blow the whole place up. It's a very, very Tarantino ending, not least because it is, both literally and figuratively, about the power of film to change the world. Tarantino even said, "I like the idea that it's the power of cinema that fights the Nazis, but not even as a metaphor, as a literal reality." Now, there was some criticism that this movie was not historically accurate because of the way it blended these fictional characters with real-world historical figures, most of whom appear almost as cartoonish caricatures of themselves. This may be a valid perspective, but I think Tarantino has an interesting response to that.
My characters changed the outcome of the war. Now, that didn't happen because my characters didn't exist. But if they had have existed, everything that happens later in the movie is plausible.
Personally, I don't have a problem with historical fiction presenting alternate histories. In fact, I think it adds to the film. When we see these real-life characters, we automatically assume that they will live and that history will continue unchanged. Tarantino doesn't let history stand in the way of his story, because as far as his story world is concerned, this history is still being written. Inglourious Basterds isn't just my favorite Tarantino movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Tarantino lived with these characters for close to a decade before he put them to film, and in doing so, he used all of his filmmaking talent to deliver, in less than a year from script completion to premiere, this amazing piece of cinema.
I think this just might be my masterpiece.
Thank you for watching, and if you're French, German, or Italian, then I apologize again for my New Zealand accent butchering your language. If you enjoyed this video, or any of the other ones on my channel, then please let me know by subscribing, and until then,
Arrivederci.